So we had a fascinating conversation today at the Vectra Bank Economic Forecast, and we so appreciate you and CSU participating. Our guests really enjoyed the whole conversation. Maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of how you framed your comments today in the context of what we saw in 2023 and what you see ahead in 2024.
Well, thanks for including us. It was great to be invited, and I thought it went really well, and I thought Nick was a really incredible resource to listen to. So compared to last year to this year, we see a lot of the continuation of some trends, but we also see the continuation of the big trends, which is the baby boomers and the millennials moving through the economy, the overall shift of our national economy away from goods to services, and we see the impact of the higher interest rates as the Fed fights inflation. So some similar topics to last year, but also some perspective that maybe that fear of a recession is actually a little bit lower now, but it's still uncertain.
And so it's interesting, you mentioned millennials and baby boomers. If I'm a business owner and I cater to baby boomers or millennials, what advice would you give me? Do I need to be nervous that those using my services as baby boomers, am I going to have a problem?
Well, there's still a lot of baby boomers, and there's still a lot of baby boomers at the younger end of that cohort.
Yeah.
It's just that in around 2026, the first boomers will turn 80. And so as a group, it's getting further and further along. So when we talk about that issue, it's demand for healthcare, demand for travel, the types of housing, how people use transportation, how they manage their wealth. So I think each business would be wise to understand, okay, what is that customer profile really?
Right.
What are their preferences? The way they like to interact with us, all those things, top to bottom. I think most businesses have kind of figured that out and are now shifting to try to understand the younger cohorts that are more digitally native, not willing to do as much as in person as online or on the phone or through an app. So I think, I think the challenge is that you have so many different types of customers to try to work with.
I think that whole topic of segmentation, demographics, all of us need to be students of that going forward. One of the things we talked about today was the issue of the wealth and income gap across the country. And what do we do with that? Are there policy issues or other economic data that would cause you to be concerned about that wealth disparity across the country?
I think policymakers should be concerned about it because it affects how your decisions play out, and it's foundational to how you conduct your tax policy. Nick was very persuasive, and it was a very fine point about how many households can withstand a $500 interruption or emergency expenditure,
right.
And that ability to absorb that is weaker, and that's a concerning thing. So when this issue came up in my talk, but also in the Q&A, I think this issue of the private sector, the government sector, and the not-for-profit sector, and the connections between them, having the availabilities and the policies and the connections so that we do have a safety net and we do have access to either retraining or training, capital investment, access to investment, a vibrant business climate. That virtuous circle is the way to get more households more stable and less inequality across our society.
I thought that was one of the most powerful parts of your presentation was that interdependence and that no one can do it alone.
Yeah.
But if we create the kind of policy and constructs to work together, it really would make a difference.
If there were a button to push, I think someone would have tried to push it.
Yeah.
But it's many buttons, and it's the interdependence, and it's the system of those three major sectors of our society working together.
One of the other things you talked about in your presentation was the relationship of the national debt to gross domestic product. And I thought that was really fascinating. And we were talking about how much more of this federal debt can we really deal with. But talking about in the context of GDP was very interesting to me. Maybe you could enlighten us a little bit more about that.
Sure. We've seen now at the peak of the pandemic or the bottom of the pandemic, depending on your perspective, over 100% share of GDP, the federal debt. And we've had that happen before in America, like right after World War II, but then it dropped precipitously. And now we're in the high 90s. So the total debt is 90-some% of our total economic output. So the question is how expensive is it to service, and what happens if there's another downturn, as Nick indicated. That wasn't my observation, that was his. I wanted to include it in my remarks because it's out there as a topic, because it's affecting the federal budget. It's affecting our political discussion, and it didn't always used to be 100% of GDP. So something's different, and it's something we have to keep our eye on. But what's really going on is, can we have better, more strategic conversations about how much revenue do we want to have and how much spending do we want to have? And that's a American political problem, and the debt is kind of a symptom of it.
It's $1 million question for our political leaders, right? Thank you so much, Henry. Really appreciate your being here and sharing your wisdom with us. It was very helpful.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
Yep.